and guide them through. We can help you with that. And we also are the people that know how to create inclusive cultures. We get a pretty rigorous process around that. So if you're interested in finding out about any of that, please contact me at laurie@aligneditwork.com. And now let's get into this Gen Z topic. So you see me looking at some notes because I want to make sure I get all my statistics and things clear for you. We were privileged to be with some leaders last week. We run, most months, we run an executive forum, and it's an invite only kind of an audience. And we're looking for senior leaders that want to get with other senior leaders, get to know each other better, and hear about a topic. It's real interactive. It's not one of those where you sign up, you get the link later. We don't send out the link later. And you get to talk to peers, ask questions, get some answers, and really work through these ideas. At the end, I'm going to tell you what our next one is. You're going to definitely want to be there in June. We're skipping May. But when we met last week with our leader team that came to our executive forum, we talked about Gen Z. And we found that, yes, intergenerational communications, issues with that, it's alive and well in our organizations. Some folks don't love when we stereotype the generations. So before I start out, let me just say, I do believe that some of the Gen Z things are unique to Gen Z. And some things are that getting started in the workplace kinds of issues that come up for all of us when we get started. And we're trying to figure things out. We're trying to figure out, is this the work we really want to do? Or did we maybe choose the wrong thing? That can be a reason for turnover. But let's look at, how do you know you've got a problem to start with? So some of the things we identified as knowing you have a problem, you might be finding Glassdoor or other social media posts that tell you that people aren't so happy with your company or maybe happy with the leadership. So that's one sign. When your turnover rate is higher than your industry turnover rate, that's another sign. And if you don't know what your turnover rate is, I would say that anybody that's 20% or greater probably has an issue with turnover. So you'll want to take a look at what your statistics are. Sometimes HR takes track of those, or some other leader in the organization does. Sometimes they don't. But it may be something that you want to track because it's extremely expensive to replace people in general. Sometimes there's a loyalty tax. In other words, if I stay here in the organization I'm working for now, I don't get the raises and the bumps up and the promotions that I might get if I took this great training that you're giving me and I went off somewhere else with it. So watch out for that loyalty tax. And then we have things like quiet quitting and dry promotions, also called quiet promotions. Quiet quitting the terminology came to us a year or so ago, but it's been out there forever. Quiet quitting isn't necessarily as negative as we think it is. It can be things like where you show up and you do your job well for the time that you're getting paid, but you're not necessarily carrying it over into the nights, the weekends that traditionally we thought was the thing to do if you're going to get ahead of work. I would say it's a recipe for burnout. So quiet quitting, not necessarily a bad thing. It's when people go into shutdown and they're really not actively participating even during those hours they are being paid. That's an issue. Dry promotions or quiet promotions are something that happen to a lot of us, particularly women in the workplace over time, where you were expected to do the job at a higher level for the same pay, the same level that you're at now, but you had to show for a while, sometimes a year, that you could do the job before you got the promotion. And we found statistically that that happened to women more often than it happened to men. Men get promoted for potential, they say, and women for already having done the job for a while. So we're finding that as companies go through economic issues or they do a lot of layoffs, the people who are left oftentimes are expected to pick up the slack, and they don't necessarily get a bump up in title or pay for that, which can cause burnout. Employee engagement surveys might show you bad things. And then the exit interviews are also indicators that maybe you've got a problem with this. Maybe you should really take a good hard look at your turnover. So We promised you some information about Gen Z. What do they want? One of the sources we looked at, and it happens to come from a company called snappy.com. Snappy actually does a lot of gifts for people. So if you want to incent people by sending them a gift, you say, I want to spend X dollars, they get a link and they can choose. So Snappy, of course, one of theirs is that that Gen Z does like to receive gifts from employers because it makes a lasting impression and impact on the loyalty, retention, and engagement. But some of the other things that they found in their study was the Gen Z wants competitive salaries along with work-life balance. So old rule, dedicate your life to the company. New rule, create a life where you've got balance and integration with work and life together. And we saw that especially through the pandemic, which is when Gen Z pretty much entered the workplace. They are, right, by the way, ages 14 to 27 right now. They'd like hybrid work. They want to be able to balance that in-person collaboration and at-home focus time. And again, they want to integrate life and work and be able to take care of the other things they have to take care of versus waiting till nights and weekends to do it. And they want managers and colleagues that communicate well and show up and actually appreciate what they do. Who doesn't like that? Other studies that I've seen they talk a lot about meaningful work, that Gen Z wants meaningful work. So do other generations. And specifically my baby boomer generation that I am a member of wants meaningful work because they are looking at legacy. Like, what am I leaving behind? And how do I want to spend these years of my time where maybe I could be retired or maybe I couldn't? Let's talk a little bit about where Gen Z and their bosses lack some alignment. And this came from Deloitte Digital. Gen Z and their bosses have very contrasting views on the importance of empathy. Gen Z said it was number 2. I don't have number 1 right in front of me right now, but number 2 in importance, whereas their bosses said it was number 5. And we see that when it's time to talk transparently or admit defeat or errors or things like that, to express vulnerability at work, we find that a lot of times the older the leader, they're schooled in the ways of covering things up and not admitting that you've got a problem with something. Again, baby boomers, we were trained never show any vulnerability. But Gen Z expects it, as does the millennial generation, at a higher rate. We've got divergent views between Gen Z and their bosses on the impact of work on mental health. So mental health is now a conversation. I believe that we are either in Mental Health Month now, May, or it's June. I believe it's May. So pay attention to that. We'll have more about that coming out in our social media. But mental health, half of Gen Z says that the boss helps them maintain a healthy workload, but 28% say they struggle with mental health because of their boss, because of bad leadership. And we know from older studies that people leave bosses at least as often, if not more often, than they leave jobs. So if you've got a great boss, great people to work with, it keeps you stuck in that job, sticky, I should say, in that job even longer. And then last but not least, they've got disparate views on the importance of work on their personal identity. So 61% of Gen Z says that they identify with the work they do, or it's part of their personal identity, whereas 86% of their bosses say that their jobs are really a big piece of their personal identity. So we could talk all day about how to fix it and all the things that you could possibly do, but probably better in a one-on-one conversation. What could possibly go wrong when you're thinking about, how do I keep people in my organization? How do I lower that turnover rate? How do I make sure that my Gen Z and millennial employees, which, by the way, are taking over numbers-wise or have already taken over numbers-wise from the boomer generation and Gen X generation. So more of the younger generations than they are the older generations. Sometimes we think we can fix Gen Z. So just as in my case, World War II parents, and maybe the silent generation that was one down from what they called the greatest generation. So when those generations trained us at work, we said, the leader is everything and it's their way or the highway. But Gen Z's like, hold that thought. We've got an opinion too. And we think that everybody's opinion matters in this. So you got to listen to us. The disconnect is when we try to fix Gen Z and get them into our way of thinking versus changing the leader's behavior to be more inclusive, to sit and listen, and then not explain away why that point of view is wrong, but to really listen, to take it in and say, so what does this mean for us here? And how do we get to the point where we are able to communicate across generations? Because older generations, even as I was new in the workforce, are always like, no, you're gonna conform to our way of thinking, which was very hierarchical. It's a much broader, flatter, rounder sense of team and community and organization now than it ever has been before. Indigenous populations know more about that than the rest of us in a lot of cases. Other things that can go wrong, there's no executive buy-in for leaders changing their behavior, so therefore they don't have to. Expectations for leaders aren't defined. So we don't really know how to change our mindset as to what we've known. The water we swam in, the air that we breathed for years was a certain way, but it's not cutting it anymore. And we think they're going to come to our way of thinking, and they're not. Training is often a one-time event, so there's no real reinforcement for any change. Training is a great way to get a common language and a common set of expectations, but it is not the end-all be-all, I say as a longtime trainer. Or we think we can throw an app or AI at the problem and that will fix it, or it's not practical or grounded. So a lot of the solutions we've come up with run into those problems, and the costs are high. The stats say that there's hard and soft costs for losing a team member. WorkHuman just put out a great report where we know that employee turnover impacts morale and it drags down everybody that remains, and therefore the productivity decreases. But it also sends a message that maybe when so-and-so left and got a better job and promotion, maybe I should go too. Or the person who leaves calls me and says, come work over here, it's even better. So those costs are high, and WorkHuman put a lot of stats together on that. If you want some of these statistics, just again, write to me at laurie@alignedatwork.com, and we'll be happy to put that out there. And then, so, what happens if I do nothing about this? Well, your costs continue to add up. People are unhappy. They find their friends on social media. They talk about your organization in a really negative way. And nobody needs that kind of publicity. They say that all publicity is good publicity, not when it comes to the fact that you're not a great employer, that you've got leaders that aren't really in tune with the way things are now. And none of us want to be irrelevant. And yet there's a big danger of that. So this concept and these ideas are so deep, but if you'd like to have a conversation about it again, reach out to me at laurie@alignedатwork.com, spelled out Aligned at Work. And I'd like to tell you what some possible next steps are for you. Some of the things that you can do, we do send a recap to our executive forum folks. If you'd like to talk about that, I do quick 15-minute overviews just to find out what your situation is and where we can just brainstorm some ideas. It's a no sales kind of conversation. You can ask for an encore session or an overview of Gen Z that's longer. That's usually an hour interactive conversation about it with slides. I didn't bring the slides on screen today, but we can do those encore presentations for your organization with your leaders. And again, I keep giving you the email, but laurie@alignedатwork.com. Our next executive forum, if you should want to have an invitation, you can reach out here on LinkedIn. You're probably seeing it on my site right now, but I'm on LinkedIn as Laurie Battaglia, one word, all spelled out at the end of the URL. And our next topic of conversation you will want to be there for. It's on June 13th. At 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And I am going to have Dale Bertrand, who is the president of the Fire and Spark Agency. It's a marketing agency specifically around SEO. And Dale was an early adopter of AI. So I thought, who better to come and talk about AI and the future of work, what leaders need to know now. So Dale will be a guest speaker at our next forum. When we did our first one, we did the top things leaders are worried about right now. AI just kept coming to the top of the list. How do we use it? What's the ethics around it? So we'll try to get into some of those questions during our executive forum. Again, Laureate Aligned at Work. Let me see if I can bring that up. Find out if we have that in our banner. So there we go, laureatealignedatwork.com. And you can also always email support@alignedatwork.com, but the Laurie one will get directly to me, and our team will take care of support. If you'd like to know more about what we do as well, here's the Aligned at Work website, and we've got a lot of information over there. So I invite you to reach out. I invite you to have a one-on-one conversation with me, and let's talk about how you save your Gen Z, keep your Gen Z all-stars. Thanks for joining us today. Have a good one.